They're back. But where are the pilots?
They're calling me, Mommy.
Flight 41, what's the object in front of you?
I don't know. It doesn't look like any airplane.
We were never alone.
The Sonoran Desert stretched endlessly under the relentless Mexican sun, its golden dunes whispering secrets of the past. The air shimmered with heat, making the horizon blur like a wavering mirage. But today the desert concealed something far stranger than the tricks of the sun. Claude Lacombe stood at the edge of the scene, adjusting his wide-brimmed hat as he studied the impossible sight before him. Several military fighter jets, their exteriors gleaming as if they had just rolled off the assembly line, sat eerily motionless in the sand. They were pristine, engines intact, canopies locked, insignias unmistakably from World War II. And yet, these planes had vanished without a trace nearly 40 years ago. Lacombe motioned for his translator, a wiry man with sharp eyes who spoke fluent French. The man hurried over, glancing nervously at the jets. "Tell them to check the serial numbers," Lacombe instructed. Workers in dust-streaked uniforms clambered onto the wings, carefully brushing off the sand that had begun to settle. One man called out a number, another checked it against an old record. A murmur ran through the group. "It matches," the translator confirmed. Lacombe exhaled sharply. This was not an elaborate hoax. These were the very same aircraft that had vanished over the Bermuda Triangle in 1945. Yet, there was no corrosion, no sign of decay. They were as new as the day they had disappeared. "Where are the pilots?" one of the workers asked in Spanish. No one answered. Lacombe turned his gaze toward a small village a few miles away, where a local witness had come forward claiming to have seen something extraordinary. He had described lights in the sky, a brilliance unlike anything he had ever encountered. As they arrived at the man's modest home, Lacombe immediately noticed the peculiar burn on half of his face, a sharp contrast between darkened, reddened skin and untouched flesh. It was as if he had been exposed to extreme radiation from a single, unnatural source. The man shifted uncomfortably as Lacombe sat across from him, the translator speaking in hushed tones. "You saw the planes appear?" Lacombe asked. The man nodded, fingers trembling as he raised a cigarette to his lips. "See, last night. The sun rose in the middle of the night." Lacombe frowned. "You mean the light was as bright as the sun?" The man shook his head. "No, the sun itself. It came down from the sky, and it sang to me." A chill ran through Lacombe despite the heat. He exchanged a glance with the translator, who looked just as unsettled. A sun that sang. What had this man truly witnessed? Thousands of miles away, inside the Indianapolis Air Traffic Control Center, a different mystery unfolded. The room was quiet, the only sounds the occasional crackle of radio transmissions and the distant hum of machinery. A controller leaned toward his microphone, adjusting his headset. Flight 41. Repeat your last transmission. Did you say there was an unidentified aircraft? Static filled the line, then a pilot's voice came through, slightly strained. Affirmative. We have visual on something. A large object, moving fast. Bright lights, red and white alternating. It's closing in on our position. The controller straightened. His screens showed nothing unusual, until suddenly they did. A new blip appeared, moving at impossible speeds, zigzagging across the radar like no aircraft should be able to. Flight 41. Can you confirm the object's shape? A pause. Then I can't make it out. The lights are too bright. It doesn't move like a plane. A sudden jolt of static, followed by a hurried transmission. It just shot straight up. God, it's fast! Alarms went off as the object vanished from radar, disappearing as quickly as it had come. The controllers exchanged uneasy glances. Nothing could move like that. Nothing human. The stillness of night blanketed a quiet home in Muncie, Indiana. Inside, 4-year-old Barry slept peacefully, curled under his blanket with a worn-out stuffed rabbit clutched in his arms. Then click. One by one, his toys came to life. The electric train whirred forward on its tracks. A stuffed bear's eyes flickered open, as if waking from a long slumber. A plastic robot jerked upright, its red eyes glowing ominously. Barry's eyelids fluttered open at the strange noises. Soft laughter echoed from the shadows. The little boy sat up, blinking drowsily. His toys weren't supposed to move by themselves, but instead of fear, excitement bubbled inside him. He climbed out of bed and padded toward the stairs. The faint glow of the kitchen light spilled across the floor. The refrigerator door stood wide open. Its contents spilled across the tiles. The milk carton lay on its side, its contents pooling into a growing puddle. The doggy door at the back of the house swung back and forth, as if someone or something had just passed through. Barry giggled. Without hesitation, he stepped outside. The field behind his house stretched into the darkness, the grass shimmering faintly in the moonlight. Barry's small feet kicked up dewdrops as he ran, laughing, chasing something only he could see. Inside the house, Jillian stirred. A distant sound pulled her from sleep, a soft, melodic hum. She sat up groggily. Barry? Silence. Then realization struck like ice water to her veins. Barry wasn't in his bed. Throwing off the covers, she rushed to the window, just in time to see her son running, his laughter carried by the wind. Chasing nothing, or perhaps something. Her blood turned to ice. Barry, she screamed, bolting out the door. Her heart pounded as she tore across the field, the night swallowing her cries. Barry was faster than she ever imagined, moving with a speed unnatural for a child. And then he stopped. Jillian skidded to a halt. Something loomed ahead, a shape in the sky. Her breath hitched as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, her mind unable to comprehend what she was seeing. The air shimmered with an unnatural glow, the sky distorted as if something massive yet invisible hovered above them. A sudden burst of light flared to life, illuminating the field in an eerie, unnatural glow. Barry stood motionless, his tiny face bathed in the light. Jillian screamed, lunging forward, and the light vanished. Barry was gone. The night was deep and starless when Roy Neary got the call. He rubbed his eyes and groaned, barely awake as he reached for the phone. "Neary," he muttered. "Roy, it's Earl." His boss's voice crackled through the receiver. "We got outages all over the damn state. Transformers popping left and right. We need every man out there now." Roy sat up, blinking away sleep. His wife, Ronnie, stirred beside him, groaning in irritation. "You're kidding," Roy said, rubbing his face. "Not unless you like being unemployed," Earl snapped. Roy sighed, swung his legs over the bed, and started getting dressed. "Of course," Ronnie muttered, rolling away from him. "Middle of the night, who cares about sleep, right?" Roy didn't bother responding. They had been having the same fight for months. He grabbed his keys and was out the door before she could say another word. The roads were eerily empty as he drove. The further he got from town, the darker it became. Entire sections of the grid were down, leaving only the faint glow of his truck's headlights. At a railway crossing, he pulled over to check his map. He was marking the locations of the reported outages when another car rolled up behind him. He signaled for the driver to pass, but the car didn't move. Roy frowned, glancing in the rearview mirror. The other vehicle sat idling, headlights on, engine humming. Then, the car lifted straight into the air. Roy's heart slammed against his ribs, his breath caught in his throat. The vehicle floated effortlessly, rising at least 20 feet off the ground before tilting slightly. For a second, it just hovered. Then it dropped. The impact made Roy's truck rattle. He scrambled to open his door, his hands shaking, but before he could step out, the mailboxes along the road started rattling violently. His flashlight flickered, then died. The engine of his truck sputtered and went silent. A deep thrumming sound filled the air. Then came the light. A brilliant, blinding white engulfed the world, erasing everything in an instant. Roy shielded his eyes, but the intensity was unbearable. It flickered rapidly, pulsing in rhythmic flashes. He reached for the truck's radio, but static filled the speakers. The railway signal beside him shook violently, its warning bells clanging wildly. Then, movement. Inside the truck, objects lifted off the seats and dashboard. A wrench spun slowly in midair. A handful of loose change danced weightlessly. His coffee thermos tumbled end over end, as if gravity had abandoned them all. The pressure inside the cab shifted. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light disappeared. The air was still again. Roy sat in stunned silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white. His radio crackled back to life. The headlights flickered on. His truck's engine roared back as if nothing had happened. He exhaled shakily, then reached for the radio dial. "This is Unit 503, reporting an incident near..." A voice on the frequency interrupted him. "Eyewitness account of a UFO sighting off Highway 6, object moving at high speed. No visual confirmation on aircraft type." Roy's pulse quickened. He jammed the truck into gear, wheels kicking up dust as he turned onto the highway. He wasn't the only one who had seen it. Jillian's lungs burned as she ran. The field was empty. No footprints, no sign of Barry. She spun wildly, tears stinging her eyes. Barry. Silence. A low hum vibrated through the air. She turned toward the sound, her breath hitching. In the distance, beyond the trees, something was moving. Not walking, gliding. Lights flickered between the branches, weaving through the forest with an unnatural fluidity. Jillian ran toward it. Her bare feet pounded against the cold earth. The wind howled around her, whipping her hair into her face. Then, a flash of red light burst through the trees. Jillian skidded to a halt. Ahead, on the open road, 3 glowing crafts soared silently above the asphalt. Police sirens wailed behind them, lights flashing, tires screeching as patrol cars pursued the unidentified objects. Jillian barely had time to process what she was seeing before a truck came barreling down the road. She yanked Barry back just as the vehicle swerved wildly to avoid them. The driver, a man she had never seen before, threw open the door. "You okay?" he gasped. Jillian clutched Barry tightly. Who are you?" "Roy Neary." Jillian barely had time to respond before the crafts swerved again, disappearing over the horizon. The night returned to silence. Roy and Jillian exchanged a glance, both breathing heavily, both knowing nothing would ever be the same again. Roy burst through the front door of his house, his mind racing. "Ronnie, get up! You got to see this!" His wife groaned from the bedroom. "Roy, what the hell?" He flicked on the lights. "Get the kids, we need to go outside." She sat up, eyes bleary with sleep. Then she saw his face. "Roy," she gasped, your skin..." He frowned, confused, until he caught his reflection in the hallway mirror. Half of his face was red and blistered, as if he had spent hours in the sun. But only on one side. The same burn as the man in Mexico. The same burn as the others. Ronnie's expression hardened. "Oh God, not this again." "This isn't some joke," Roy snapped. "You have to see it for yourself." "See what?" she shouted. "Aliens." He fell silent. Ronnie exhaled, shaking her head. No, Roy. You're not dragging this family into one of your crazy obsessions." She turned away, already climbing back into bed. Roy's hands trembled. She didn't understand. No one did. Outside, the sky stretched vast and empty. The lights were gone. But he knew. They were still out there. And this was only the beginning. Roy Neary sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at his plate of mashed potatoes. The room buzzed with the usual sounds of dinner, his kids arguing, Ronnie trying to keep order, the clinking of silverware. But Roy wasn't there, not really. His fork hovered in the air, absently scooping potatoes onto his plate. He wasn't hungry. He was building. Without thinking, he shaped the mound higher, smoothing the sides, pressing ridges into the surface. His fingers worked with an almost mechanical precision, molding the potatoes into something that felt right. The room fell silent. "Dad?" one of the kids asked hesitantly. Roy blinked, looking up. His family was staring at him. Ronnie's expression was a mixture of worry and exhaustion. "Roy," she said, voice tight, "what are you doing?" Roy glanced down at his plate. His mashed potatoes formed a tall, jagged peak, something out of place, something unnatural. But to him it was familiar, important. "I don't know," he admitted, suddenly unnerved by his own hands. Ronnie sighed, rubbing her temples. Jesus, Roy. You've been acting weird ever since that night. I told you it was probably a weather balloon or a military test, or... It wasn't a balloon, Ronnie. Roy slammed his fist against the table, making the dishes rattle. The kids flinched. Ronnie set her fork down. I want you to stop talking about this. I mean it. You're scaring the kids. Roy opened his mouth to argue, but something in her voice made him pause. He looked at his children, his daughter pushing peas around her plate, his son nervously staring at the potatoes. He sighed. Okay, he lied. Ronnie eyed him warily, then nodded. She picked up her fork, signaling the conversation was over. But it wasn't. Not for Roy. Days passed, but the image in Roy's head wouldn't leave. At work, he caught himself sketching shapes on paperwork, mindlessly dragging his pen over the margins of forms. At home, he built towers out of pillows, arranged soap suds in the sink into peaks, stacked garbage cans in the driveway, each time getting closer to the shape he couldn't understand but desperately needed to. The mountain. He had to find it. Meanwhile, in India, Claude Lacombe stood among a sea of people. Thousands had gathered in a small village, eyes turned to the sky. The air hummed with something ancient, something primal. Then, as if carried by the wind itself, a melody drifted through the air. A simple 5-note tune. The crowd began to chant in unison, voices rising and falling with the music. Lacombe's skin prickled. He pulled out his notepad, quickly transcribing the notes. It was no random sound. It was communication. Jillian stared at her walls, gripping a charcoal pencil with shaking hands. The paper in front of her was covered in frantic sketches, dozens of jagged peaks, mountains looming over empty landscapes. She had been drawing for hours. She had seen the shape before. In the newspaper, on the television, in Barry's toys. It was calling to her the same way it was calling Roy. Outside, the wind howled. Then, a flicker. She turned. The storm clouds over the field pulsed with light. They were back. She bolted to the door, heart pounding. Inside the storm, something moved. Not rain, not lightning, but lights, twisting, shifting, creeping toward her house. She slammed the door, locked it, bolted the windows, then a rattling from the chimney. She grabbed a chair and shoved it against the fireplace. The rattling stopped, a sound from the floor vent. She threw a rug over it. The house was alive with electricity, toys flickering to life, radios switching on, televisions blaring static. Jillian covered her ears, screaming. Then silence. Barry was gone. Roy sat in front of the television, barely listening to the news. His family had left. Ronnie had packed the kids in the car and driven away, tears in her eyes. She thought he was losing his mind. Maybe he was. Then the screen flickered. A breaking news alert. A train carrying dangerous chemicals had crashed near Devil's Tower, Wyoming. The moment he saw it, everything in his body clicked into place. The mountain. It was real. He wasn't crazy. He grabbed his keys and ran out the door. The road leading to Devil's Tower was packed with cars, their headlights slicing through the darkness. Families, farmers, and entire towns were evacuating, herded away by military roadblocks and government officials. The false news of a chemical spill had done its job. Civilians were fleeing, but Roy Neary was driving toward it. His hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Every sign, every piece of this puzzle had led him here. The shape in his mind, the mountain, had been real all along. Up ahead, flashing red lights signaled another military checkpoint. Soldiers in gas masks waved people away. Roy's pulse quickened. If he wanted to get through, he couldn't take the road. He swerved sharply, crashing through a wire fence, tires kicking up dust as he sped across the countryside. Somewhere in the darkness, another vehicle did the same. Jillian. They caught sight of each other as their cars bounced over the uneven terrain. She rolled down her window, and for a split second, their eyes met. No words were needed. They understood. They weren't crazy. They had both been called here. Together, they drove toward the mountain. When they finally reached the base of Devil's Tower, the air was eerily still. The hum of helicopters in the distance signaled the military's presence, but no one had spotted them yet. They climbed higher, the weight of exhaustion forgotten in the face of what lay ahead. With every step, the image in Roy's mind became clearer. This place had been burned into his thoughts long before he had ever laid eyes on it. Something was about to happen here. Something big. The two of them reached a plateau, breathless from the climb, and froze. A sprawling military compound had been built into the base of the mountain. Floodlights illuminated rows of scientists and government officials huddled around massive communication devices, and then a light, a small, bright glow flickering in the distance. Then another, and another. 3 UFOs emerged, gliding silently over the horizon. The air became electric, pulsing with an unseen energy. The scientists scrambled to their stations, the speakers crackled to life, and a familiar sequence of notes played, the 5-tone melody. The UFOs answered, a single note, then another. The sounds built upon each other, weaving a pattern, a language. Roy's breath caught in his throat. They weren't just watching, they were communicating. The military officers around them relaxed, tension easing. It was working. They were making contact. And then the sky cracked open. A storm unlike any Roy had ever seen rolled in, swallowing the stars. The air became heavy, thick with an unnatural presence. From within the storm, more lights appeared. Not 3, hundreds. Jillian gasped. Dozens of UFOs swarmed across the sky, moving in perfect harmony. They descended toward the compound, casting eerie reflections over the metal structures. The entire mountain pulsed with light. And then, from the darkness, the mothership. It dwarfed everything. The behemoth emerged from behind the mountain, its enormous structure glowing like a second sun. The air vibrated, and Roy felt a pressure deep in his chest, like standing too close to an explosion. The scientists played the melody again. The mothership responded, its deep, resonating tones shaking the ground beneath their feet. Jillian grabbed Roy's arm. "They're not leaving this time," she whispered. The ship landed. The missing pilots, the Cotopaxi crew, civilians who had vanished decades ago. They stepped forward, blinking as if waking from a long sleep. They hadn't aged. Then, a small figure appeared in the light. Barry. Jillian let out a strangled cry and ran forward, nearly collapsing as she scooped her son into her arms. He blinked up at her, dazed but unharmed. The scientists murmured among themselves, awestruck. These people had been taken, but they had been returned. And then the real visitors arrived. The first alien emerged slowly, stepping into the light. It was smaller than expected, delicate with elongated limbs and dark, expressive eyes. It tilted its head, studying the humans. Then it raised its hand. Lacombe, standing at the forefront of the scientific team, raised his own hand in return, carefully forming the 5 musical tones using the hand signals he had taught his colleagues. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, to everyone's shock, the alien mimicked him. The crowd erupted in whispers. This wasn't just a visitation. This was an invitation. A group of men in flight suits stepped forward, volunteers chosen to accompany the aliens as representatives of humanity. Lacombe nodded in approval, but as they prepared to step into the ship, something unexpected happened. The alien children turned, scanning the crowd. Then they pointed at Roy. Silence fell. Roy's breath hitched. Him? He turned to Jillian, his mind spinning. She saw the look in his eyes. "You were meant to be here," she whispered. Roy swallowed hard. Then, step by step, he walked forward. The other volunteers moved aside, allowing him to take his place among them. He didn't hesitate. The alien reached out, its small hand closing around his. Roy's heart pounded as he stepped into the light. Behind him, Jillian watched, tears in her eyes, holding Barry close. The mothership hummed, its lights intensifying. The ground vibrated beneath them. Then, with a final flash of brilliance, the ship ascended. It rose higher and higher, its glow fading into the sky until it became nothing more than a distant star. Roy Neary was gone. Jillian stood in stunned silence, watching the night return to stillness. Around her, the scientists, the officials, the military, none of them spoke. They had witnessed something beyond comprehension. The world would go on. People would forget. The government would bury the truth. But she knew they were never alone. And Roy had touched the stars.